occasionally we review comedy here. And, I've done a couple of videos on, Dave Chappelle and all of the controversy around him, supposedly being transphobic and kind of negotiating the complexities of, when does a joke sort of become more than a joke? When is a joke marginalizing? What inspired Dave Chappelle to sort of take a look at the LGBT, particularly what he considers to be the LGBT lobby, and kind of break it all down and try and contextualize it. Because very often it's never as simple as jokes bad, joke's bad, person telling the joke bad. Very rare is that the case. And also it's not as simple as, jokes are jokes. And, unfortunately everything kind of intersects now with this much larger political landscape, which is all part of the attention economy and recreational outrage and all these other facets of existing in a digital space. So, reviewing that stuff, I thought, was kind of important. And comedy itself is important. Comedy is an incredible tool that you use to speak truth to power, obviously through the mechanisms of satire. It's obviously as well often a way to hold a mirror up to society and kind of say this is where we're at right now, but to do it in a safe environment where you're not committed to any of the ideas you explore. And in times of great uncertainty, and let's be clear, we certainly live in those. We've come out of a very bitter and divided geopolitical landscape, a rise of authoritarian governments, not like the ones Americans are LARPing about, but very real in other parts of the world, increasing sort of almost traditionally fascistic, mega corporations, tied into global governments that are able to buy anything and everything they want. We've just had a global pandemic, and whether we want to acknowledge it or not, there is kind of this little undercurrent that we might be on the precipice of World War III. We probably aren't. We don't need to worry about it too much, but, we probably are, aren't we? A little bit, just a little bit, So there's some trepidation, and comedy obviously, shakes the shit out of us and just makes us realize, don't take all of this too fucking serious, because it is but an illusion. So anyway, I'd like to review comedy now. Some of that stuff was a little bit philosophical. And how I'm going to frame this video, what it'll be called, will be a tale of two specials. A tale of two specials, because Netflix released two specials simultaneously, relatively simultaneously, in a close proximity with each other. And one is Ricky Gervais's latest special, and the other is Norm Macdonald's final special, which isn't really a special, because he recorded it in isolation during the pandemic in 2020 when he was about to undergo an operation. And obviously, as we now all sadly know, he was making it sound like it was a routine operation. It actually was part of a very serious battle with cancer that he'd fought privately for 9 years before he pieced out and did what they call the Irish goodbye. The Irish goodbye, if you've never heard that phrase before, is typically where you just leave and never don't say anything about it to anyone. You don't give any indication you're going to leave. You just bail, and typically you use that if you just fuck off from a shit party, He took the Irish goodbye. But anyway, these two specials went out onto Netflix, and one really generated a lot of controversy. The Ricky Gervais one generated a lot of controversy because there was jokes about trans people in it, following that kind of almost proud tradition, I guess, at this point of Netflix comedy specials, generating media attention by having content related to LGBT people. And the other one that, to me, didn't generate enough media coverage was the fact that Norm Macdonald did an incredibly sweet and, it was almost, you could see in the recording, which is done without an audience, done in one take, literally just being recorded via a MacBook. You could see he was essentially saying goodbye comedically in some way. And so he's completely removed a lot of the bitterness and kind of the cheapness of some of the jokes, which, by the way, Norm Macdonald is one of those people where you can tell he's not a malicious or malevolent person, and he's not, he's cheeky is the word you would use. And even when he would say something that was absolutely outrageous, Norm had a way of delivering it. You would always kind of forgive, even if it was kind of really offensive, because often that shock was kind of the point. So anyway, I watched both these specials within a day of each other, and then I was like, that's kind of interesting. I think these are very interesting as a contrast. And so I got to thinking, well, I'll go on stream and I'll talk about it, since actually the Dave Chappelle videos did pretty well. And funnily enough, when I was on Twitter, and I don't want this to ever happen again, somebody was linking Vorsh to my Dave Chappelle review, saying, "Oh, Richard Lewis is like an old LGBT guy that can tell you about the history of how trans people were essentially sold out by mainstream society, because mainstream society wanted to put everyone all in one little pigeonhole and then just forget about us, and so he got linked to that, and I was like, oh fuck me, please no, like if he watches this on stream, my life's over. All the freaks and the crazies I've been trying to avoid, all the political demagogues are gonna come and get me. But fortunately that didn't happen, so we got away with that one. So look, I then decided, okay, well, I owe it to the stream to be up to date. So I watched both. I fell asleep watching the Norm special last night, and I rewatched the Ricky Gervais special. And so let me just give you an overview of my thoughts, and then I'm going to talk about the specials in depth and why I didn't like one at all and why I really liked another one. You can probably guess which way around that is. So basically, the Ricky Gervais special, it's called Supernature. Ricky Gervais, for me, I have sort of a weird relationship with Ricky Gervais's content, because I think The Office was a brilliantly written piece of not just observational comedy, but it tapped into an experience that many people in Britain were living, but wasn't being reflected in media. At the time, one of the things I despised about the BBC, and one of the things that I despised about just media in general, was presentations of the working class. And you have to remember, there was a huge shift with the kind of creation of office spaces in the 90s, where we went from being the typical working class person would be on a building site, would be, doing in a factory on an assembly line, would be a mechanic. It would be, at best high-skilled but very physically demanding labor. This is obviously in a post-industrial landscape where the steelworks are closing down, certain types of factory are closing down. Japanese car manufacturers in the northeast, like the famous Nissan factory in Sunderland. Obviously the mines were closed down at this point. And so what ended up happening was there was essentially, much like there was a schism in terms of the working class who could afford to buy their council house, because at that time in the 70s and 80s, it was something ridiculous. Like 80% of people lived in property that was owned by the government. Essentially, it was the norm. Certainly, the 80% might be slightly inflated, but anyway, the majority of people lived in property that was owned by the government. That was just how that worked, and you essentially leased it from them. And then when all this push to private property ownership was there, what ended up happening was people started to buy their houses, and that created a schism in the working class, because you could own your property and be surrounded by people who didn't, and then you would erect a fence and you would say, fuck my neighbours, I'm better than them now because I own my house and they are council estate scum. You live on the same estate you've lived on all your life. The Conservatives knew what they were doing with that one. And then the other big schism was you essentially had two types of working class people at this particular moment in time in the 90s, when we started creating these call centers. And that's go-to working class, minimum wage work. But you got to know how to log into a computer. You got to be able to type. You got to be able to push a button on a phone. You've got to use like technology in a way that you might not have counted if you're from a manual, labor background. And so it was kind of like the original learn to code for British people. It was that, listen, if the factory you work in closed down, can you go and work in a call center? Can you be publicly facing? Can you have a nice speaking accent on a phone and all these other things? And so it wasn't that the working class got upwardly mobile and that those were middle-class jobs. It was just that it created another schism in the working class, the type of people that could go and do that work, and essentially the type of people that couldn't or didn't want to. And so what you notice in The Office, it's not middle-class people. They're not talking in a way that would be out of place in a factory or a working men's club or whatever. They're very blunt. And, Ricky Gervais, even in a managerial role, you can see how he's kind of anchored to that working class culture, the need to have a pint and associate with these people and stuff. So it reflected an experience that wasn't really being represented in British media at that time. And also, got to be said, the alternative was shit like the fucking royal family, which always stuck in my craw, because the royal family imagined that the working class family unit sat in their living room eating their tea on their laps, farting and laughing at each other's farts, and that's what the working class did for entertainment. You're up there, he's had a fart, and that was just what the working class did, apparently, according to the BBC. So I never liked that. I always thought that was like a ridiculous stereotype of the working class moron that, you know, dickheads in the home counties in London obviously believed, but wasn't a real reflection of my experience, certainly. I know that Ricky Gervais, he'd done some stuff before The Office. Obviously, I think he was on what used to be called the Late Night Show or something on Channel 4. Where his gimmick was he would come on and he would do some really edgy jokes about how the elderly deserve to die, or, you know, we should stop trying to cure Alzheimer's, or just edgy shit, you know, like edgy 90s comedy, you know. Anyway, then he wrote The Office, and I was like, oh, Ricky Gervais actually is a sort of a serious comedic presence. He went on to do extras, which I sort of liked because it was unique to his experience, and, you know, the whole thing about getting his TV show made, it was very self-reflexive, so I fucked with extras as well, and there was some like staggeringly, excruciatingly cringeworthy scenes that I could sort of like relate to in my life, even though, you know, they weren't traditional to like my background or my experience. But, you know, that one scene where the girl goes over and the girl has the really domineering parents who want her to be an actress, and they come out and they have to do the musical number, you know, making your mind up. That is so, you know, I've seen shit like that in my life, and it's horrifying and horrifyingly hilarious. So really like that. But in general, I gotta say, I don't think he's a great comic nor a great writer, and I find most of his content really fucking tedious. Derek was one of the worst things I've ever seen. Borderline offensive. The fact that his portrayal of someone with learning difficulties is absolutely appalling. And then his stand-up just seems to be, I'm an atheist, people who aren't atheists are stupid. Here's some jokes about really tired references, the sort of things that you used to joke about in the 90s when he was on The Late Show on Channel 4. And now it's like 2022 and you're still doing Hitler jokes, you know? So anyway, I wanted to kind of frame that. So I'm biased against Ricky Gervais in the fact that I really don't think he's a good stand-up. You know, he wouldn't make my top 50 probably. And with that in mind, I sat down to watch this special. All I could think of at the start was Al Murray. Why, Richard? Ricky Gervais isn't bald and 6'2" and waving a British flag. No, here's the thing. Al Murray, the pub landlord, was a parody. If you've never seen Al Murray, he plays a British pub landlord who's like one of them dickheads who are like one step away from joining the EDL, who say, you know, like, yeah, well, we fucking beat the Germans, yeah, 2 World Wars and 1 World Cup, do-da, do-da. Those dickheads. You've met them, you know? You've seen them out there. And so he was a parody of that. And so what started happening was, he would do his shows and do his jokes about, you know, Germans are bad, the French are all cowards, rule Britannia, and it was a parody. But then his audience became the people he was parodying. It is just a sea of gammon at an Al. This is true. An Al Murray pub landlord event. It's just swollen pink faces, baring their teeth, howling with laughter, and not understanding the joke is them. It's so repulsive. And I watched the start of Ricky Gervais, and I was like, oh God, he's gone over. He's gone over. He's become the next Al Murray. His audience are awful. They're awful. It was the same sea of gammon. It was just dreadful right from the start. The standing ovation, the performative. Woo! Nope, shut the fuck up now. Shut the fuck up. Ricky's going to do a joke. Ricky's going to do his jokes. And I was like, oh, God. God, he's like, he's completely unaware of this. He's sort of become like almost a parody of himself. Keep in mind, he has parodied himself in his comedy, and I always suspected deep inside he would sort of eventually become you know, like a David Brent type figure, or you know, like when he did that festival and he did the dance, you know, because he couldn't fill for 9 minutes. It started to happen in this special. Now, I don't recommend you watch this special. I think the special is fucking tired. So what I did was I went through and I listed all of the jokes, all of the bits in chronological order. And so I'm going to go through his entire set and tell me how many times you roll your eyes at these jokes, okay? Because I think these jokes are they're just old and stale and not funny. Does his intro, talks about how he's successful, okay? 5 minutes, he's got to the trans people jokes, saying, do you remember the old women, the obsolete women, the one with wombs? There's a whole bit about how women being raped in prisons, and the most important thing is using the right pronouns of the attacker. That's 5 minutes into the special. And I was like, all right, well, this is a bit more of a blunt joke than the Dave Chappelle stuff. And, you know, listen, there's probably some very intelligent comedy to be written about the trans experience, but I've definitely not heard it or seen it. And it's definitely not going to come from Ricky Gervais, is it? Let's be real. You know, it's just weird, this sort of like obsession that they have with, like, listen, I get it. There's probably some limits you need to put, like, on the pronoun thing, for example. Like, I've said it many times myself. I can recognize all of the big ones. Once you start saying you know, I have to call you Patches or you're a dinosaur or whatever, I'm out. Like, I'm not coming along for that ride. That's like some performative attention-seeking bullshit. Don't really consider that to be the same as people that are sort of struggling with to be accepted for their gender identity, frankly. If anything, I think it's reductive to their problems. But also, you know, when you consider, you know, I looked at the numbers, and it's something like 500 trans people in America in most states for every 100, well, between something like 100 and 500 trans people per 100,000 people per state in America. It's a tiny fraction of the population. And so when you dedicate, I mean, and this is like 5 minutes of material, when you dedicate that much of your set to this tiny subset of people, it's just really weird. It's almost like, is this the type of problem that you need to be doing comedy about? But anyway, okay, right. Listen, I also acknowledge that if you want to be accepted in the broader conversation, a part of that is you have to open yourself up to ridicule. That's fine. But let's just move on. He then did a routine about being cancelled on Twitter. Well, we can all identify with that, can't we? Oh, no, we can't. We're not all white millionaires. We're not all terminally online. So, okay, he did a whole bit about that, how he was tweeting, having a shit, and how funny his tweets are, and how he got cancelled for them. Great. Okay, good. Then he told the Liam Neeson Kosh story, which, if you don't know, Liam Neeson, the actor, who I think, well, yeah, he did. He appeared on Extras with him. But he told a story about, and this was in 2019, so again, not particularly current, but Liam Neeson, apropos of nothing, decided to say that after a friend of his was raped by a black perpetrator, he harbored racist thoughts and was walking the streets armed with a kosh looking to get into a fight with a black person. And what was bizarre about the response to that was people said Liam Neeson was being brave by admitting he had internal racism, and probably more people did have this type of internalized racism. And I can tell you, no, that's not true. Liam Neeson basically just had a strong racist reaction to a situation where race wasn't a factor. And that probably means he does harbour some racist thoughts. Most people wouldn't react that way. And also, the bit just wasn't funny. But okay, it's all right. The jokes are coming now. Ricky's hit his peak form now. He said, that's the thing, isn't it? That's the thing they say. Ooh, you mustn't punch down. They're the rules of comedy. They're the rules of comedy. You mustn't punch down. Ooh. But sometimes you have to punch down. What if you're fighting a disabled toddler? He said, to raucous laughter from the gammons. Raucous laughter. If you punch up, you will miss the disabled toddler. And then he did this. Now, keep in mind, again, I see some people in the chat laughing at the jokes. I want to make it abundantly clear. I think I laughed at one bit. I've got it written down here. Best gag. We're coming up to it. Then he said, people talk about being marginalised. You know, you look at the community in the UK, it's 5% black people, 5% Hispanic people. Less than that are trans or gay. Well, I just want to say, I'm a white heterosexual multimillionaire, and as I'm sure you've heard, there's less than 1% of us. That was a bit. That was a joke. No, that was the joke. There's no elaboration. Then he went on the bit about if you're offended. Obviously, we have to talk about that. How he doesn't care if you're offended or not. And he said, if you are offended, you can go out into the lobby and ask for your money back. And what they do is they'll give you a complaint form, and you can fill in that complaint form, and then they pass those complaint forms on to me. And then I take the complaint forms and I shit on the complaint forms. That, my friends, are the rules of comedy. And then he walks off and performatively has a sip of beer. And again, raucous laughter from the gammons. Big joke, big joke. So as you can see, I mean, he's really front-loaded the special with all of the greatest hits. So the best joke was this, but he started segueing into his religious material now. Because obviously Ricky Gervais is an atheist. You might have heard that. He's an atheist. And he said, some people believe in reincarnation. Some people believe in reincarnation, don't they? And I knew this group that believed in reincarnation. And isn't it weird, isn't it, when you do reincarnation? You know, no one ever comes back as just a peasant. There were always someone famous in a past life. Not like now, where they're nobody. They were always famous in a past life. So I went to one of these parties. They have these parties, these reincarnation beliefs. This is the best gag. They have these parties, don't they, the people who believe in reincarnation. And what you do is you go as who you were in a past life. And I got there, and there was 2 Napoleons. So one of them was lying. Thought that was the best joke of the special. I admit I laughed at that one. That was okay. It's tired material. That joke's been done by many comics about reincarnation. Now you always come back to something, whatever. But fine. That one was okay. He does a bit about atheism. God continues atheism. Says prayer is worthless. When people say, my wife's got cancer, and they say, I'll send the prayers, I go, yeah, all right then, fine. But let's not stop the chemo, because chemo and prayers is the same as chemo. So let's not cut the chemo and have the prayers. Let's have the prayers and the chemo. That was the joke. Then he made a point about, he said, isn't it weird that we spend our time worrying about things that don't matter in a week? God, we're bloody stupid for that. Why do we worry so much about meaningless things? Now, keep in mind, he's already done material about imaginary trans people he's never going to meet, and him getting cancelled on Twitter, which, I don't know, probably. Guess there's no self-awareness in this set. Okay, next bit. that was a bit. Next bit, he did a bit about cats and dogs' different penises. He says, sometimes I do believe in God because I think about the way the penises of cats and dogs represent who cats and dogs are as creatures. You see, a dog was asked by God, what type of penis do you want to have? And the dog, because dogs are nice, the dog said, I don't know, maybe put it on a nice puffy mound. And what would lady dogs like? Maybe it comes out like a lipstick, because ladies like lipstick. But cats have barbed penises, don't they? And that's just cats, isn't it? What type of penis do you want? I want an immobilizing fuck pole. That was the cats and dogs penises bit. We move on. They can't all land. He then did, because again, he's got to he's got to do the gammon checklist. He said, burqas. You've seen the Muslims, haven't you? And some of the women, they wear burqas. And some people say, she should take that burqa off. It's not very empowering for women. And I say to those people who say that, that's not up to you. That's up to her husband. So a bit of Islamophobia in there. We got that in. We worked that one in. Good job, Ricky. Right, next bit. we move on. AIDS. This is legitimately this is the material, I swear. AIDS. He said AIDS isn't as cool as it used to be, he said. Then he did a bit where he pretended to be AIDS talking to God. And God was saying, you've got to go and get all of the gay people because I don't like them having sex. And AIDS was saying, wait, why? And God's like, because I don't like looking at it. And then he says, the AIDS goes, but where are we going to have to live? And he goes, I'm going to make you live inside a human anus. So that was that bit. Then he, which biologically that's not accurate, by the way. AIDS doesn't live in a human's anus. Anyway, then he said, remember when AIDS used to kill people? And you would go, oh, bloody hell, oh, used to make sex dangerous and sexy. Oh, I hope I don't get bloody AIDS off this. But now you just go, oh, I'll suck a dick and take the pills. That was the AIDS material. We move on. We go to abortion next. Abortion. He does a bit where he goes, to anyone who doesn't agree in a woman's right to abortion, they always, the anti-abortion people always do this trick, don't they? They go, a woman is about to have her 6th baby, and she has 5 children. 2 are deaf, 2 are blind, and 1 is seriously developmentally disabled and might not live long. Should she have her 6th child? And if you say no, you just killed Beethoven. And so he says, well, 2 can play at that game. A woman has had 2 beautiful, successful, artistic babies. Should she have a 3rd? Yes. You've just given birth to Hitler. He then holds up a photograph of baby Hitler and says, why is it people with a time machine always say they'd kill Hitler as a child? Why do they say that? They would buy Microsoft stock. But anyway, look at him. Look at how adorable baby Hitler is. Ha ha. He does laugh here. He seems to be genuinely cackling at his own jokes. Ha ha. Bet you're all wondering why I have a picture of baby Hitler on my phone. So what if I do masturbate to it? He then talks about growing old. He says, people say, Ricky, you should stop drinking and stop eating so much food. I am fat. I know I'm fat. I should stop drinking and stop eating so much food. I am fat. And they say you'll live 10 years longer. But that's the 10 years at the end, isn't it? If I got to be 20 to 30 again, it'd be worth it. But no, it's the 10 years at the end when you can't walk and you're senile and you shit yourself. Not worth it, is it? So my advice is eat and drink and do what the fuck you want. Must say I'm not a doctor. Now, as a student of comedy, that bit has been done much better by Bill Hicks and then was stolen and still done much better by Dennis Leary in his No Cure for Cancer special from the 90s. Anyway, don't worry, guys. We're almost at the end. He then proceeds to say, fat people are jolly. They always seem to be laughing, don't they? And even though I hate fat people, even though I am fat, sometimes I do feel sorry for fat people. Like when I see those 600-pound men winched out of their houses on a crane and they're looking down at a film crew. I think if you're ever being winched out of your house and looking down at a film crew, you are probably thinking, man, I have fucked things up. Okay, the next bit is he says, compassion is important. I feel sorry for people who were put in asylums in the olden days, for people who weren't doing anything except things like having sex out of wedlock or whatever. And those people got electroshock therapy or had holes drilled in their head and they got put in asylums. And that's terrible. We went too far in not letting those people live their lives. But these days, I could have my legs removed, replaced with wheels, say I identify as a pram, and if you say I'm mental, you're a bigot. The gammons all laughed. And then he stopped and said, that joke is a bit of a hack joke, but I'm leaving it in to offend people. Now, I'll also add, he sort of has missed a broader point of contextually, will there be a group of people looking back at the way we've treated other sections of society and going, oh God, we were really cruel and malicious to these people that were just trying to live their lives, just like the people he said he had empathy for, but now can't identify with that as a concept for this new group of people in the present, not realizing he was the same type of demented feral person that would have lobotomized Francis Farmer for writing a poem. You can't really stare into the abyss too much with that one, I guess. Anyway, he then decides after the attack helicopter bit, listen, obviously these are just jokes. I support trans rights. That's why I include them in my special. Be who you want to be. But women, could you meet me halfway and lose the penis? He then proceeds to do a bit about how if he was a child now, he would blackmail his parents into saying, I think I'm trans or I need a new bike. And his mother would say, well, I think you need a new bike. And he would go, you're the boss. He then did a whole bit where he is a fictitious lesbian called Vicky Gervais, where he says he would be a butch lesbian if he was a lesbian, and he would keep his beard. No, just kidding. And I would go back and I would have sex with another woman as a lesbian, and when she asked me to get out a strap-on, that's probably when I'd kick myself. Next bit is a racist bit about the Chinese, where the punchline is, they say their L's and R's the wrong way round. Really? In 2022? That's it. Then he does a theoretical, he says maybe we could cure paedophiles by finding voluntary dwarfs to have sex with them. Don't worry, they'd be free-range dwarfs. And then he ends on a bit about how he loves his mother, and his mother always said what she wanted, and then justifies this entire terrible special by saying, you know, it's just banter, isn't it? That's just what working class people do. Banter, banter, banter. That's our way of saying we love you. So really, this special is actually a love letter to all of humanity. Bye. Thank you very much. That was Supernature. That was Ricky Gervais's Supernature. Pretty much in order. I might have fluffed the delivery on some of those. After all, I'm not a professional comedian. But listen, if I had to sum it up in a word, that word would be fucking lazy. It's trash. It's tired, worn-out material that ticks all of the 90s edgelord box. You know, Hitler, AIDS, abortion. You know, it's pathetic. It's really, really pathetic. And he delivers it all with a really self-satisfied, smug quality to him. He basically says, you know, like, oh, I'm a millionaire, me, about 3 times in the special. I can do what I want. I'm a millionaire, me. I went to a doctor. I'm a millionaire, me. I just pay them. Pay them. I just pay the doctor. I'm sick. Make me better. Millionaire, me. So, terrible, terrible special. And, you know, got what he wanted out of it. Did generate some sort of, you know, cool. You can see here he had to respond. He said that this was in entertainment publication Deadline. He's like, oh no, the joke weren't trans people, but trans activists. Which, listen, yeah, they're probably lumped in with it, but no, the material would be blanket enough to just sort of be like, just shit and pathetic, just as it is. But anyway, it worked. Ricky Gervais got to say, I'm the victim. Look at people trying to cancel me again for just jokes. To be fair, you should be cancelled because your comedy special was on a par with... I mean, put it this way. When Amy Schumer does a bit about how her fucking vagina smells, it's not really a million miles from this, is it? So the Ricky Gervais special was one of the worst comedy specials I've seen. Not just recently, of all time. It is truly garbage. Not offended, by the way. Can't offend me. It's just not funny. It's just criminally not funny. It's boomer comedy for gammons that have lost touch with like the digital world, and like, Ricky's the boomer whisperer, isn't he? Ooh, I've got a Twitter account. Ooh, cruelty to animals bad. There is no God. It's just really awful. And so this came out and, really trumpeted, had a huge, fanfare, and everyone was talking about it. And then obviously you've got this component to it where, listen, people probably don't realize this because you might have missed the Netflix news where Netflix actually said, if you're offended by, content like the type in a Ricky Gervais special or a Dave Chappelle special, they actually circulated an internal email that said, you're probably better off leaving the company because we are going to continue to create content like this. You can see this is in the week. Netflix tells employees to quit if they don't like the company's content. You might have missed that story. And obviously, all of the, right-wing, idiots, all of the chuds were like, look, see, it's proof. Go woke, go broke, it rhymes, it must be true. And obviously, it's a strategy from Netflix. They're not based. They're a corporation. They don't care about being based. They're just massively losing market share, massively losing money, massively losing subscribers. And so they need to retain as many as possible. And if they can trick a few chuds into thinking they're on their side at the expense of a few employees they'd rather not be paying anyway, that's the calculation that they're doing, just so you know. They are going broke, but not because they were woke. They're going broke because they got there first in creating an online streaming service, but now the big people with more money that can create more IP and know how to market it, your Disneys, your Amazons, are now creating more content and offering a cheaper alternative to Netflix. It's not about their ideology. And in the same way, it's baked into every TV show in the wokosphere, or whatever the fuck you want to call it, where what you do is, like Ghostbusters, the reboot, the pretend sexism was baked into the marketing, same as this new Obi-Wan Kenobi. They're like, oh, if you criticize this actress, you're all racist chuds. It's baked in. It's a trick. In the same way, Netflix are playing a trick now, saying, nope, we fully support comedy, and if you don't like it, leave. Yes, they're going broke because they were woke, but now they're on the right-wing side. They're a corporation. They don't have a political ideology or affiliation. Yes. Okay, so the Ricky Gervais special comes out. It's marketed really heavily, really aggressively, about as aggressively as a Netflix special will be. It's talked about online. Loads, again, depending on where you are in the politosphere, all the chuds and the right wings and the Fox News journalists, Ricky Gervais has created a triumph. He stuck it to all of the crying woke babies. It's like, no, he hasn't done that. He's written a terrible comedy special. And on the other side, all the people, with the blue hair and too much time on their hands, what do? God, he's evil, he's transphobic. It's like, it's not even the edgiest material he could have done, really. It's just tired is the word for it. So all that happens. Meanwhile, while that's going on, this Norm Macdonald special slips out. It's called Nothing Special. Norm Macdonald, obviously, is no longer with us. And Norm Macdonald is one of those comedians where I see a lot of people talk about, I love Norm Macdonald, but they never, watched his stand-up. They never watched him, when he was on late-night TV. They never saw any of his movies, certainly, when he had that phase. They got into him a little bit later on by seeing, funny podcast clips, or, he's on Conan O'Brien, and he's doing one of his, ridiculously, tediously long jokes deliberately drawn out for the whole segment just to deliver a punchline that's so underwhelming. The whole construction of that joke is the joke. People talk a lot about Norm Macdonald without really knowing his history or who he is or what his material's like and what he's actually all about. And that's fine, to sort of come to a comedian later on when they're not fully appreciated in their lifetime. I think Norm Macdonald is a comedian that's going to age incredibly well because of some of the material he did kind of towards the end of his life. And not just material, but content. You know, Norm Macdonald was a guy that was like always thinking, you know, his gears are always grinding in a comedic fashion. He's looking to make every situation he's in potentially, you know, comedic. And, you know, Jerry Seinfeld does a series, you know, Comedians with Coffee or whatever the fuck it's called. And, or Coffee with Comedians would make more sense. But anyway, the episode he does with Norm is fucking fantastic. It's hilarious. It really is one for the ages. Yeah, that's it. Comedians in cars getting coffee. There you go. So anyway, this special slipped out, and it was very arresting. I sat down to watch it. I was like, wow, Norm Macdonald's last special. And as I told you at the start, story around it is he thought he was going to die. And so he delivers this special. He does this straight one take, microphone, you know, straight to the person recording it. But it's very upsetting. He's gaunt. He looks ill. You can tell it's near the end. And as I said, the perfect antidote to the bitter gammon comedy of Ricky Gervais. Let me give you an example, because I've written all the stuff down. I've realised I've just spent an hour doing Ricky Gervais's special. But like, let's just do a bit, right? So Norm Macdonald was a gambler. He was a notorious gambler. He was considered a bad gambler. He was considered like to be a bit of a gambling addict. He was always in casinos, always in Vegas, always doing sports bets. He used to love, you know, playing roulette. And so the start of his special is all about Vegas. And he goes, listen, I'm what they call a degenerate gambler, and I lose money all the time. So let me tell you, when I gamble, I prefer them Indian casinos. And why? Because my forefathers systematically massacred them, which looking back was way out of line. So when I go to these casinos and I lose, when I go to these casinos and I lose my money, yeah, I see it as reparations. And let me tell you, I've done my part. I've been gambling a long time. And when you get gambling and you start talking to gamblers and you start hanging out with other gamblers, you know, when you go to Vegas, turns out everyone in Vegas has a system, you know? They have a system to beat the house, beat the bookies, beat the wheel, counting cards, all these systems. And it may surprise you to know that oftentimes these systems do not work at all. My favorite game is roulette. You know, and I try and have a system. You know, I was watching, roulette. You know, roulette when the ball goes round. I was watching there. I was there at the table. You know, placed my bet. The ball goes round. You know, and bah, it came up red, and I screamed, "Fuck! I almost picked that." So anyway, he does this really great bit of kind of self-aware comedy about gambling and everything else, and then he gets to this point, and he does do trans material. And he starts talking about how, how he'd react if one of his kids had come to him and said, Dad, I want to be a girl and all this stuff. And I don't want to do the bit because it gets increasingly more. It's like I say, it's the word for it is almost like sweet. That it's an old man who's a little bit out of time. Literally out of time in terms of what it meant for his life. And he's looking back and thinking about the landscape he lives in now and how things have changed. And, he's decided in his final comedy special he's going to eschew judgment. The special ends up petering out. He starts talking about his mother and how he misses her and all the great gifts that she sort of gave him as a person. And then the special ends. And then it cuts to, many of his comedian friends. And they do a 30-minute reaction to the comedy special. Dave Chappelle's there, and they do a 30-minute reaction to a comedy special. They all tell their favourite stories about Norm. They react to the material and say how good it is and why it's funny and everything. And it's just really nice. It's nice. It's a reminder of how comedy can be unifying and how you can touch people's lives with it and how it's just... At its best, it cuts through the absurdity of existence and finds the commonality of the human experience. And none of that was present at all in Ricky Gervais's comedy special. Ricky Gervais's comedy special is the type of... it just makes me despair for the vast majority of the population. Whereas Norm's was kind of like, even in the face of oblivion, you can go out kind of, saying some important and poignant things. I strongly recommend, if you get a chance to watch one comedy special, watch Norm. It's got a fantastic title. It's called Nothing Special because it was essentially a cancelled special he couldn't make because of the pandemic, and then obviously later his death. It also is an allusion to him being nothing special, which is, of course, a lie. But also, as well, in light of his death and the fact he probably knew he was dying, calling it nothing special, that's just what existence is, man. That's just what existence is. It's just a moment, It's just a blip. So yeah, Ricky Gervais bad, Norm Macdonald good. That's the summary. That's the review.